All right, we're going to jump right into part three. Based on the comments that I've gotten and the feedback from the first video, I decided to just continue. We're going to do the whole video. We sort of left off with Jonathan talking about the difference between, we'll say, other religions and Christianity. And, this isn't about me agreeing or disagreeing with any one of these three, right? I'm trying to provide you as close to an independent, not neutral. I'm not neutral. No one's neutral. We're all kind of in this world together. But I'm going to try to provide you an independent sort of breakdown of what it is I hear them saying. So let's jump right in.
Yeah. So again, I'm actually going to be playing with like wooden knives right now, but you're going to get there. I think this might get there. So, an invitation to break the wheel of karma, a vow not to leave the wheel of karma until every other conscious being, sentient being, has done so. Sentient being. Compared to an invitation to get on your cross. That the proper orientation of the transcendent with the immanent is to pour itself into it, and to actually so utterly love creation. This is it. So it's the key is like, man, Christians get this wrong all the time.
By the way, can I just interject in one phrase? I respect the fact that you're demonstrating genuine reasonableness of entering into self-criticism. So I just wanted to appreciate that. So please go ahead.
Okay. I just, wow. Yeah, Jordan seems to be having some, quote, insight, right? And I wouldn't classify this as, we'll say, a deep insight. I mean that with no disrespect. I would classify that as an insight of how to communicate better, right? A thought that you have. So I go through this all the time. I have these thoughts. I want to communicate them. I don't actually know how, right? And usually what I'm doing is not coming up with new ideas. It's just communicating ideas I've already had. And then John, again, he's sort of, well, I'm going to congratulate you. Why? Are you the authority of congratulations? I mean, what is this move? Genuine what? How do you know it's genuine and what is it? I mean, other than the fact that Jordan wasn't being genuine as in, oh, I know for myself this. He said Christians get this wrong all the time. And so what John seems to be doing here is saying, oh, well, you're genuine on behalf of Christians. Now, I've already talked about this. I don't like the term Christianity. It doesn't work post-Reformation because what is follower of Christ? Ask every Protestant denomination and get more answers than there are Protestant denominations. And again, they're missing Mary. They're missing the crucifixion. They're missing the symbolism. They're missing the ritual, right? I mean, ritual you came up with last week is not ritual. They're missing a true lasting liturgy, right? They're missing a bunch of extra biblical scholarship and distributed cognition, if you want to think of it that way. So they're missing all these pieces, right? They're missing the divine feminine in particular is huge. Like, how do you go about anything without that? So the idea that Jordan is kind of apologizing on behalf of this larger group, which I don't think he's doing, by the way, it seems a little ridiculous, but that seems to be what John's keyed into. I mean, I don't know what's going on in the guy's head, but that's kind of why I wanted to note that, because I don't know what's going on in his head right there. It's not really clear why that move is a good move. Like, I actually don't think that's a good thing to do. It doesn't smell to me as though it's a move done of John's genuine admiration. He seems, I don't actually like this term. All right, I'll use the other term. He seems to be a bit arrogant about this, as though he's taking the high ground and saying, oh, I've noticed this about you. It's like, what? Not in a loving, equal manner, but in a superior manner. Again, as though he's been appointed to notice such things. And, he's talked in the past about participant observer. This is a contradiction in terms and therefore is false. You can't be a participant and an observer at the same time by definition. So no. I understand if you want to claim you can be two people at once and one of them is observing the other, but I think you're crazy. Sorry, for all people that make that move. So this is a very similar thing. Oh, I can be above the conversation while I'm in it. No, you can't. And if you so much as try that, you're arrogant, because no one can do that, because you are one person, not two. And while you may be smarter or better or faster or more than the other person or people in the conversation, you still can't do that for real. All you can do is withhold some of your considerable attention from the conversation. But that's not better. That's worse. So I just want to note that. And I like the response from Jonathan and Jordan here. It's pretty funny. They just both kind of chuckle.
Yes, I think actually in some sense you may be speaking for the comments as well. Everybody, John just said, this is genuine reasonableness, not just incompetence.
Well, and you'll notice, Jordan notices, John says it's a genuine reasonableness. And again, what would that be? This is actually something I heard in another talk on Tammy Peterson, episode 107, with Margarita Mooney something. I forget her last name. But anyway, she was talking with Tammy Peterson about the idea that everything outside of you is material and the things inside of you are like truth. Like truth is inside of you. And that leads, of course, directly to your truth. This is a statement that John has made in another place, and I'll be doing a commentary on that. That's what that leads to, right? Things like truth, beauty, and goodness are not within you. They are outside of you, and other people have equal access to them. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It just technically. It's non-utilitarian, it's non-functional, and it destroys the world. Fan of the world, please don't destroy the world, please. Still going there. And so, Jordan kind of points out this inconsistency. Reasonableness would not be within him, and therefore it could never be genuine.
Okay, let's see. So it's almost like the reverse direction. This notion of escape versus immerse, right? The call is not to alleviate suffering. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. The call is actually to recognize that the world is so rich that suffering is intrinsic and meaningful, something like that. Right? That God, the actual transcendent, Buddha nature, but in this case, comes into reality and lives directly with other people and suffers. In fact, not just suffers, but allows himself to take on the fullness of suffering. Not to have us escape it, but to remind us that that's actually the thing.
Okay.
Right?
I just want to stop it here. Yeah, I mean, that was very well said by Jordan. That was really good. There is a fundamental difference between, well, maybe not Eastern Buddhism, because I don't think anybody in the West really has a chance in hell at really understanding that. See The Geography of Thought by Nesbitt. Good book, great book. But certainly in Western Buddhism, there's that idea of escape. And ironically, that's a very Western idea, that there is a this and a that, and the opposite of this is that, and there's an anti-everything. None of this is true. It's all useful, right? And the Eastern thought is very much not that, ever. It's all integrative and cyclical. That's how they think, right? So the study in the Geography of Thought book, or one of the many studies, is this idea that that if you go to somebody, or 100 people in the West, and you say, hey, the stock market's been going up for 3 days, what do you think it'll do tomorrow? Almost all of them will say continue to go up. If you do that same thing in the East, they're going to say it's going to go down. That's that sums up the difference as best as I can figure it. Nesbitt obviously goes into a lot more detail and a lot more examples, but that cyclical nature as opposed to that linear progression, right? And the linear progression is impossible, and so it leads to this opposites or opposing or opponent processing framework, which is clearly just observably wrong. So please don't think that way. So you'll notice that, and another way I would put this for Jordan is I would say, look, in the Anglo-Catholic ideal, Christ is the human aspect of the divine creator, and therefore he acts as an exemplar for how we should behave when we suffer, when we struggle with temptation, when we walk upon the earth and disappoint people who have high expectations. And that includes ourselves. That's the best sort of as secular as I can get summary. I don't know how good it was. Let me know in the comments of what he just said. And in fact, my sort of conception of not only what they're talking about, but my personal understanding of, which is very, very recent, by the way, of Anglo-Cathodoxy and what it's actually stating, we'll say theologically, right? It's about this participation exemplified by a person, right? You're supposed to, we'll invoke Gerard here again, mimic that person, right? All the aspects that you need for mimicking, for being able to have your life, all right, and having something to mimic are in that story of that one figure, Jesus. And that's what enables you to know what to do and when to act and when not to act and what kind of actions to take, like turning over the tables, for example, and at least whipping animals, if not also people, at least verbally whipping the people, all of which is necessary, right? It's all exemplified in the stories.
We are not, it's not like, oh man, suffering was an error. Tell you what, guys, I'll give you a suffering Band-Aid so nobody ever suffers anymore. That's not the thing. It's rather, no, the way this thing is supposed to work is you're descending into a deeper and deeper capacity to suffer, because that's what engagement with reality actually is to undergo, right? To undergo reality, experience, and to grow and to mature. And so instead of dying and escaping, what happens is you die and you enter into even deeper capacity to enter into a relationship with a large and ever-expanding reality. And this is the opposite of a naive notion of non-duality, which is an elimination of difference, right?
Right.
It's actually, no. It's an embracing of difference and a deeper wholeness that produces a deeper capacity for differentiation and an ongoing unfolding.
Okay, I want to stop it right there because, wow, that was really good, actually. So this sort of gave me an insight. Thank you, Jordan Hall. Excellent work. I haven't thought of it that way before because I guess there's no possible way I could have conceived of this. I talked about this earlier, right? So in non-duality, you've got actually lots of potential positions, right? Duality is one stated position. Non-duality could be 0, could be 1, could be 3, or anything above 3 as well, right? That's a lot of things. And so there is no opposite to non-duality, right? Because an opposite implies something equal just on the negative side or something. Whether or not it should is a different story. I'm just going to invoke, that's the way we use it, folks. I'm not going to try to justify it with definitions or etymology or any of that nonsense. I'm saying this is how people are talking. If you listen carefully, I think you'll hear that. And maybe you can't, and maybe you either have to take my word for it or just rebel, if you wish. But I think this is really helpful, right? It hadn't ever occurred to me that when they're talking about non-duality, they're actually talking about one, which I would argue will simplify to 0 and therefore lead to nihilism, which would explain a lot now, wouldn't it? Now that I'm pondering this for the first time, it never occurred to me that non-duality would mean one, because I can't look that low. It's my failing. It's just like inconceivable to me until Jordan mentioned it and laid it out, and I'm like, oh, that's what they're doing. That's exactly what they're doing. And of course it is, right? Because they've already rejected the Trinity. So if you reject the three and you want non-dual, well, you're not going to go up in numbers. That gets less believable. If you want to see a ridiculous, less believable, you can listen to my commentary on Pageau and Alex O'Connor. That was the first commentary that I did, where Alex O'Connor makes the same bizarre mistake, actually, but he goes full in, right? He says, well, this belief in one God is ridiculous, but, this Gnostic belief in two gods, that's way better. So just like, what? How did you get there? So I guess in this case, they're kind of doing the right thing. No, I don't believe in duality. I believe in oneness. Like, what? That's not helpful. Because you've already rejected the Trinity. So they're not going to go for the quaternity or something, right? They're going to go down. I don't know why I didn't see this sooner. But this is why these talks are helpful. If they're helpful to you, and I will take a moment to mention, read the comments on my first video. A couple people were saying wow, this is really interesting. I didn't notice this stuff, and this was helpful. And, one of the commenters was like, I'm going to make a new practice where I slow down and stop videos and take time to integrate. It's like, oh, that's actually a good idea. I do something like that. I've just never sort of thought of it that way. I get cognitively overloaded and I stop videos. And I've said this before, there are videos that I watch in chunks because I'm just like, whoa, I know I'm overwhelmed. But some people may need to stop and think really closely about what they just heard in very small chunks. I don't know, no shade on you, do what you got to do. Everyone's got limits and, whatever. It's that we're all different. It's fine. I only do this for you because I can kind of get away with it. I'm sure there's plenty of stuff I'm missing too. I'm not claiming this is the, definitive commentary on this. No, certainly not. And plus it's only my perspective. And the part of the point of this channel is to say as secular as possible, right? I don't want to stray into the more religious or Anglo-Catholic territory or anything like that. And which is hard, obviously, but why Christianity is the title. So, kind of in the deep end of the pool there. But I do want to try to reframe it as much as possible so that you see this different perspective. That's none of these guys, right? And so we've got a recent convert to the faith, right? We've got an orthodox, deeply orthodox believer, right? And then we've got John, who's way out on the fringe, right? And so I don't want to claim I'm in the middle of this or anything because that would be silly. There is no middle, but I'm definitely not Anglo-Catholic explicitly, right? I don't identify as a Christian or anything. And I can't, that would be disingenuous. But I'm more along the lines of Jordan Peterson, and the way he talks about it. I don't want to remain sort of scientific because that would be completely insane and hasn't worked for us. So I don't know why more would be better. So thinking about this in terms of insights, I just had a reasonable insight here, a genuine wow, I had never thought of it that way. I had never communicated that before, but I genuinely realize now, hearing Jordan say it, oh, they've rejected the Trinity. They're rejecting dualism, right? So we don't want three, we don't want two. We're going to go with one, and then that's what's causing a lot of the problem. It's this is great. This is fantastic. I'm super happy with this conversation. It's maybe this sounds a little hubristic or whatever. It's very rare that I get that level of insight from a conversation like this. I haven't recently. I've sort of been noticing the pattern and saying, oh, I know this pattern. How this pattern plays out. This is a very familiar pattern, and relating it to other patterns that I've noticed. But to have that again, I guess I couldn't look that low. Who would go to one? I mean, I guess, yeah, non-dualism. We don't like three, we don't like two. And that's the flattening of the world, right? We don't like to think of the world as having three variables. But two variables, yeah, that doesn't work. That leads to war. Literally, dualism leads to war, right? But also one doesn't work because you can't differentiate. So that also leads to war, just quicker, basically, right? And so it makes more sense that way to me, that's what's been going on all along. So I just wanted to share that little insight and show you, with these conversations, you can have that. But are you having that is the question. And like I said, read the comments in the first video. Some people realized they weren't. They're like, wait a minute, I'm getting overloaded by this stuff. I'm not really absorbing what they say. I'm not really actually understanding what they say, right? I'm just psychologically projecting and injecting my own views and finding ways to validate them or rationalize them. Maybe all rationality is post hoc. I'm not going to die on that hill, but something to think about. Let's continue.
Okay, this was really good. And none of these compliments I'm giving you are facetious. So I'm trying to put a couple things together. You got this is like an extended version of the reciprocal opening, what you just did, Jordan. So you're acknowledging that. That's good. Yep. And I take it that that's what you mean by joy. The problem with when people hear joy is they think intense pleasure, and that's not what we're talking about here. And of course, you can forgive them for that because we have this stupid word enjoyment, which just means intense pleasure, which really messes people up. Okay, so we've got that, and we've got the idea that this reciprocal opening can be very, Jonathan was pointing to, like there's a universal temptation to misconstrue the reciprocal opening as escape. Rather, it's an entering into deeper and deeper relation, right? And that's properly agapic, right? Because it's anagogic, agapic together. Is that landing?
Yeah.
Fairly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I just want to point out something real quick here that probably just skirted right past, 99% of the viewers. John said extended reciprocal opening. Now, the trick here is, since we've never defined reciprocal opening that I'm aware of, John, what do you mean by extended reciprocal opening? Why would Jordan's description of something that you would describe as reciprocally opening be extended? Like, what would give it that quality? That's a good question. So John seems to have assigned a quality to the reciprocally opening that Jordan described with really little or no justification. I would say zero justification whatsoever. I don't know why he did that. I actually don't agree that the reciprocal opening is being seen as escape. I don't think it's reciprocal opening. I don't think when you say you want to escape this world, you're saying you want to open up this world, because escape and opening are different, and one does not follow from the other, and cannot, would be my argument. Escape means you're leaving the closed thing behind. That's what it means. And in fact, the implication from the word escaped is that you can do that. There's a thing that's holding you back, and that when you're on the other side of it, you are out of it, and therefore it can't expand or move to get you, or you might be wrong about that, but you're using escaped as though that is the presumption of the end result, is that it's not going to chase you. Anything that's reciprocal opening is obviously moving and becoming bigger, and therefore you can never escape it. And interestingly, that's actually what Jordan previously described, right? Like the suffering reciprocally opens and gets bigger, and in that you get bigger in your capacity to handle it. And that's a positive aspect of suffering, and suffering as reciprocal opening. So I actually like that way of thinking about it better. And I think what John's trying to do here, we'll say unconsciously or subconsciously, is he is trying to relate and redeem or save the other notion that's just escape. Because I think Jonathan nailed that. Like, it's just escape. That's what they're describing as escape. And Jonathan said this early on. Notice, Jonathan didn't get the same accolades for saying roughly the same sort of statement that Jordan said. That's interesting, by the way, but we'll set that aside. He said many Christians have this problem. They talk about, heaven and earth as though you leave earth and go to heaven, and that's the same problem as Buddhism. I agree, that is true. No credit for being genuinely humble there.
And then the idea here is that what Christianity offers is an alternative in which ontonormativity, being as fundamentally good, not ethically good or aesthetically good or even epistemically good, right? Beyond the true and the good and the beautiful, it's just good. Being is good in this ontological sense, and that's what I heard you saying in some sense. Is that fair? Like you're getting a sort of a reading of Genesis. God looks at the world as good. Right? He's not making a moral judgment. He's not making an aesthetic judgment. He's not making an epistemic judgment because he's God, right? So he's saying something else. He's saying that being is intrinsically good qua being. Just by being, it is good. So that's why escape is fundamentally wrong. Because if being is intrinsically good, seeking to escape from it is intrinsically wrong. Am I getting your argument correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to point out a few things here. I can't parse what ontonormative means, but since there are 5 definitions of ontology, and I'm fairly familiar with the 2 big ones that everybody uses and then equivocates on, to use John's excellent framing. This is what I really liked about John, especially with the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, which I don't actually suggest anybody watch, by the way, unless you're really prepared to take notes and treat it like a 4-year degree, because it kind of is. And watch for mistakes, because John makes quite a few of them. He talks about equivocation as a big problem, right? We equivocate on language. Well, people tend to equivocate on ontology, especially the science people. I wonder why that is. And they use ontology as categorization versus ontology as being. Now, why ontology would mean being, I don't know. I don't know where this came from. I could probably do a little research and figure it out, but why? No. How's that? Why? 2 words, different things. Don't equivocate. Yeah, don't use them. Keep ontology in the ontology box with the science where it belongs, which is, roughly speaking, I've maintained in other videos, ontology as categorization is roughly the thing that you do when you're doing philosophy. So we'll say ontology, every set of categories is a type of philosophy to the ancient Greeks. I think that's 100% clear. Don't think that requires any interpretation or imagination on my part or anyone's part to come to the conclusion of, without even doing, we'll say, much reading, because I haven't actually. It just seems clear to me that that's what they're talking about, right? And so a natural science for them or natural philosophy rather, is what we call natural science. Yep, absolutely. Right. And there are ontologies within that, right? They would probably break it out differently than we do, right? The sciences are probably each a different type of philosophy to them. That's how I would do it. Maybe that's not right, but I suspect that it is. And if I'm wrong, so what? Who cares? I don't have a PhD. I got nothing to hold up. I don't have a degree in anything. I have a degree in spouting my ideas on YouTube. That's about it. So I don't know why he throws in ontonormativity there. It's almost like he's trying to capture the essence of a religious argument with sciencey terms. And I'm a no to that. I think that science is limited and kind of lame, actually, especially as used by, we'll say, modern folks or recent times, right? Very lame, bad frame, not all-encompassing. It wasn't for the ancient Greeks. Just read Plato's Republic. It's full of references to the gods. Don't know why. Must be something about logic, reason, and rationality that can't make justice work by itself. Probably. At least that's how Plato does it. Might be a hint that you have to do it that way. Plato was pretty smart. Heidegger could get past him, and Nietzsche probably couldn't either. So it's a good hint that we've been wasting our time with so-called modern philosophy. And John then goes to the correct assumption, although this being a qua or whatever nonsense, I'm actually familiar with that mode of speech. I just I use it to be funny. I don't use it. I mean, I'll use it if I'm with somebody who talks that way, because you want to communicate well. But yeah, I wouldn't use that. Starting axiomatic statement instead of primordial presumption. The first principle, the axiomatic statement that is made by the creator of, roughly speaking, all the things, right? Being is good, right? And therefore you can't escape from it. Yes. So notice here, and I have a little insider track that I'll share with you. This is arrived at backwards by John. And he goes to, well, God makes the statement because God is the creator of everything, sort of a thing, right? So he gets there exactly backwards. So it's like he's trying to use science to justify an axiomatic assumption or a first principle or a starting axiom. That's weird. I don't know why or how you can do that. I don't think John actually believes being is good, because you would never do that if you believed it. You'd just be like, duh, of course being is good. And when you start from the first principle of being is good, you don't have these questions. This ontological normativity, which again, as near as I can tell, that those two words, A, don't work together, and B, don't form what he implies they form, isn't required, because being is good. Like, so start there and then you move forward. You don't start somewhere else and move backwards to being is good. That makes no sense. So I just wanted to point that out, because that's a little bit of a magic trick in my mind. I don't think John believes being is good. He's done this before. Being asked flat out, is being good? And instead of saying yes, or yes, and let me explain to you why I believe that, he worked his way backwards into it and then agreed with his reasoning. That's a very dangerous thing to do. Logic, reason, and rationality cannot tell you the truth, the good, and the beautiful. And this whole idea he started with, where there's a goodness that transcends the true, the good, and the beautiful, that doesn't make any sense. That's gobbledygook, doublespeak, and you should ignore it. No, the transcendent good is the transcendent good, the transcendent beautiful is the transcendent beautiful, and the transcendent truth is the transcendent truth. Hey, wait, there's three things. How weird. It must be a coincidence.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's interesting too about, for example, Christian theosis, like the notion of Christian theosis is, I remember when I was first interested in Orthodox theology and I had read a lot of esoteric texts from other traditions, there was something about Christian theosis which annoyed me, because it was like, it wasn't the full thing. It wasn't like the complete, absolute, ecstatic, elimination of me. And then after that, I realized, well, actually, no, wait a minute. I think that all things are good. And so, right, St. Maximus says that we participate, that we become God to the extent that that's possible. That's just the phrases he uses. Is what he means is, in something like, we become God to the extent that the world that you continue to exist, that you continue, because your being is good is good. It has a goodness. You don't want to completely snuff out the particularity that God has put in the world. And so, and it's when I kind of understood that I realized that the image of theosis that Christianity presents is something like the fullness of all things, right? So all things are mirrored, are these reflections of God, and that is the fullness. That is the fullness, like that is more full in a very mysterious way. I don't know how to say it metaphysically, but that is more full than just the non-dual God, right? Just the God that transcends all things. That God that transcends all things, creating the world in love, so that it becomes a transparent, reflection of himself in a way that doesn't destroy any of that particular, but rather, gathers it in love, in multiplicity and unity, that's a bigger vision, actually, than being a drop that goes back to Brahma.
Okay, I want to stop it there. Obviously, John, this is a great job here. Man, that's fantastic. That's really good stuff. I wanted to jump back, though, real quick at something that I didn't mention earlier. And I'm sort of questioning myself. Did I not mention that because I forgot? Did I not mention that because I thought it was a good idea? I don't know. It's okay. I'm not really wrapped up in that too much. I was just curious about it more than anything else. How am I thinking? And then I realized, you're dumb. You don't know how you think. Don't worry about it. Right? Just let it go. It's fine. Just think. It's quicker. If you use up all your thinking time on thinking on how you think, then you won't be thinking. You'll be thinking about how you think. And yeah, that's not helpful. So when Jordan mentioned earlier this idea of suffering and that's, being able to deal with suffering makes you better, the thing that flashed through my head was Jordan Peterson saying, burn off the dead wood. Because suffering is very much telling you there's something you have to let go of. And maybe that thing feels like goodness to you, or feels like truth to you, or feels like beauty to you. And maybe it is. But maybe it's not transcendent truth, goodness, or beauty. Or maybe it's not transcendent enough. And that's why you need the suffering, is to refine it. It's just one possibility. I'm not making theological claims here. I'm not a theologian. I wouldn't dare. But that's what it brought to mind for me. I wanted to mention that here because Jonathan sort of alludes to that, right? Like there's some refinement process about theosis that is refinement. It's not escape. It's not destruction, right? It's not elimination. I like that word. Elimination is really good. You're not eliminating anything. You're refining yourself through the suffering, right? Or you're not refining yourself. That was my bad. I apologize. You are being refined by your participation in the world, which can suck, by the way. Yeah, for sure, right? Suffering's real. And struggle's real. Struggle's daily, struggle's minute by minute. But in that struggle and in those sufferings, you are refining yourself in your participation in the world by burning off the dead wood, among other things, we'll say, right? But there's a refinement going on that's happening not by your will alone, but hopefully in cooperation with your will. And that's what this idea of Anglo-Cathodoxy theosis is. I'm not sure the Protestants have proper theosis. And if they do, they're going to have to prove it and bring a lot of goods. I don't know where that is, particularly we'll say in the Bible, for example, but hey, happy to have the convo.
I'm not here. I'm not trying to defend Vedanta.
No. I don't want you to defend Vedanta. I'm just using examples to say why I think, even my own process of kind of seeing what was precious about.
I think this is good, by the way. I think you're making I mean it again. I think I think we're getting into dialogos. I feel like these are good answers that are provoking me in a Socratic way. I feel that, and I just want to share that. It's happening for me. Okay, so I that's good.
Okay, I just want to go into it here. So John says I don't want to defend something that he wasn't asked to defend. And Jonathan, sort of points that out to him. Like, we're not asking you to defend our doctrine or our dogma or our ideas, just sharing them. And then John from there backs off when Jonathan says, no, we're not asking you to, bro. Like, what are you doing? Right? And he goes into, this is genuine dialogos for me. And it's like, well, look, dude, have you defined dialogos really? And let's be a little fair to Mark. Like, I was there when we were talking about dialogos and what it is with John in Q&As, right, on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord. And there's a YouTube channel for that, Q&As and things like that. And in the course Cultivating Wisdom, which again, last time I checked, might be fixed now, but wasn't a year ago, was in the Cultivating Wisdom course, which was the follow-on to the meditation course, right? Which is how I got into John Vervaeke. It was really the meditation course, and building the community around that. So I this move about dialogos and invoking it and saying, well, I'm getting dialogos. I don't even know what it is, and maybe you're getting it. But these two are trying to share something personal about their stories, and you're trying to, again, confuse the specific for the general here, and make generalizations and general talk, but then say you're learning something. I got my doubts. I'm a little skeptical on that one. I try not to be too skeptical on things in general, but this doesn't pass the smell test for me. So if it didn't pass the smell test for you, maybe that's why.
So now, can I add, in that spirit, there's two things here. So, I mean, this issue has been broached in some very deep interreligious, I should say, but also interpersonal dialogue, which goes on to dialogos.
Okay, I want to stop it right here. Sorry, guys. This issue has been breached or discussed before. Which issue? What I heard was a personal tale of, I guess in Anglo-Catholics you would call it revelation, that Jonathan had about the nature of theosis. Is that the quote? That to me is not an issue, by the way. It's a process of becoming, or in this case, it's a discussion about the process of becoming closer to the Creator. I don't know how you would parse that as an issue exactly, especially not when it's already been established and not explicitly agreed upon, but actually implicitly agreed upon. Again, there's these little hints, right? That all other religious traditions, other than Anglo-Catholicy, I'm going to die on that hill, not Protestantism, are definitely not escape. The Baptists are very escape theology people, very much. But not the Anglo-Catholics, as near as I can tell. There's a definite difference there. They're not escape-based. So if we're not talking about escape-based, and we're talking about this way of becoming part of the unity of the Creator through the process and refinement of suffering, which is how I'd recast all this in that slightly larger frame. And hopefully, maybe you have to go back and watch, but I've talked about the same thing twice, but I included more this time, right? This theosis frame. I actually included that in a much wider way, which is why I reframed everything. That's what reframing is, right? New perspective, always a reframe. That is not an issue. And there's no contrast because we've already implicitly agreed that there isn't. So if you get a funny feeling about this at this point, that might be why.
There's Cobb's book, a dialogue, a Buddhist and Christian dialogue that is mutually transformative. And then even more importantly, the anthology around the work of Maso Abe, which Christians and Jews and others replied to, in which he said, it's called Emptying God, in which he said, well, what we're ultimately talking about here is kenosis, right? And he basically says, well, doesn't kenosis ultimately require, right, the emptying of emptiness itself, this Zen notion? And he says, I don't see Christianity getting to that in some way. And a way of making this perhaps a little bit more concrete, as Jonathan, as Jordan keeps calling us back to, is, I get what you're saying. How do you make sure this isn't just a crypto egoism, which is I don't want to cease to exist? And
wow. Yeah, we're never going to get through part 3, are we? Sorry, guys. A title, that implies a conversation between two types of faith, because Buddhism and, quote, Christianity are not religions, right? They're more like spiritual traditions or something that contain sorts of religious offshoots, maybe, might be a way to think about it. And that conversation being transformative, that's the height of arrogance to put that in your title. I'm just saying. It's a clever trick, right? Like, reading this book will make you a millionaire, or reading this book will make you feel better. Wow, what a setup to feel better or become a millionaire. Sure. Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. Haven't finished it, by the way, but it's interesting. I sort of see what's unfolding there. That's a trick. I'm just going to tell you that's a trick. It might be a trick the author's playing on him or herself. Fair. Also, it's a trick. I don't care. I don't know. I can't know. And it doesn't matter. Right? Because the end result's the same, whether the motivation is external or internal, we'll say. It doesn't affect the outcome. That's why you can take an action, because the more information won't help, right? The detail won't help. I got to do that video. More information won't help. The detail doesn't change the action. This idea that we have to empty emptiness itself. Okay, let me be fairly clear. That doesn't make any sense and cannot ever be made any sense of by anyone ever. Okay, let's just lay our cards out on the table. Self-reference is nonsensical. By definition, all self-reference is nonsensical because it cannot be made sense of, because it's an infinite loop or an infinite regress, worse yet. Which, if it's an infinite loop, fine, you just go nowhere and waste all your time, and then you grow old and die not having done any number of things because you were contemplating the infinite loop. Fair enough. Also, don't do that. Infinite regress is parasitic. You're destroying the world. Yep, please don't do that. Don't do either of those things, please. Please. Right? And so we've gone from reciprocally opening, and reciprocally opening is good and being is good, right into, at the very least, infinite loop of emptying emptiness. Although I would say that's an infinite regress, and that's parasitic. You can't empty emptiness itself. That makes no sense. It cannot be made sense of, and there's no reason to do that. It's this equality doctrine again. Like, well, we need to reduce emptiness to its core empty component so that we don't have to think about emptiness and non-emptiness, because now either emptiness will become something because we've emptied all the emptiness out of it, in which case there's no more emptiness to contrast against. By the way, without contrast, you can't see. And then we can think less, because now we don't have to think about the emptiness. And oh, by the way, now the nihilism is gone because emptiness doesn't exist. Sure, that's crazy talk. Sorry, that's just nutty talk. And then John launches into this, how do you know you're not just being egoistic? Excuse me? Did you just hear what you just said? And what nonsense you just went through to say it? And you're worried about other people being egoistic? I'm sorry, John, but hate to break it to you, buddy. Pot, meat, kettle, both black.
And that's why this is so good.
But think about what it looks like in practice.
Oh, I guess I paused too early. And that's why this is so good. Why would that be good?
But it looks like in practice is I am constantly trying to cease to exist. That's in the sense that Christianity, the idea of kenosis and of self-emptying.
Yeah. Keep going.
The way that Christianity functions is like humility, self-sacrifice, of giving yourself in love, and the surprise, or the surprise to realize that that's the actual anchor of being, that's the actual anchor of how you exist, and the resurrection in the end. What is resurrected is all my gestures of self-sacrifice are resurrected into me, but me obviously in a mysterious way, in a mysterious. So there is something. Everything about Christianity is this kenosis. Without understanding that, you can't understand any of it. Like, why do we have martyrs? Good. Why do we have all these things? Like, it's like everything about it is this emptying that brings fullness.
Okay, I want to add a little bit of nuance here, because I think possibly, obviously, Jonathan Pageau is French Canadian, and they're obviously God's chosen people, and therefore he can do no wrong. I know this because I am also French Canadian. And yes, I've said that to him before, by the way, in person. I would say it looks like emptying from the outside. but you participate in, you experience a fullness. So, and this is very common this is common confusion with us, with every single one of us, myself included, right? When we look out onto the world, we see things happening in the opposite direction. And it's not because we see them happen in the opposite direction. The things we see or sense have already happened. And so when we see somebody act in the world, they have already made a judgment that led to that action. And in order for that judgment to happen, they have already had a discernment already. It already happened. We perceive only the action, obviously, right? We don't perceive their judgment and their discernment. We can infer one of those. I would argue you can never infer discernment. It's just two layers of abstraction, and therefore the inference doesn't apply. Maybe I'll do a video on that. If you want to see a video on that, let me know in the comments. I've talked about this before with my discernment, judgment, action. I have a live stream. There's 3 live streams. They're over a year old now. I can't sort of fathom that myself. But also I did another video on discernment, judgment, action. That's a recorded video. We see it backwards. We experience discernment, judgment, action in our heads, obviously, right? That's the end, is the action. For everyone else, our action is the beginning, and then the judgment and inference is the two things that happen last in their head, obviously. And we don't think of it that way. But that, I think, is a better way to think of this, except with this twist. What you perceive in the other person, and I had a boss like this, is joy, right? I had a boss who's always joyful. And one day I just asked him, like, because I'm a super realist, especially when I was younger, I was a super realist. I was like, hey, let me ask you a question. You always seem like super happy. And he was like, well, no, it's joy. And I was like, okay, fair, sure. It's joy. It's not happiness. Yeah. And he says, I wake up every day joyful. And I was like, wow, that's super powerful. It's just like, wow, I can't even conceive of that. I'm trying to get closer myself. I had another experience where a couple I know that's been married for some time. I was talking to the wife. I'm friends with both of them, obviously. And she said, oh, one of the things I like about my husband is he wakes up every day. I think her word was happy. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. I never would have guessed that about him. Not that he was ever unhappy or anything around me. I was just like, oh, you didn't think of it that way, right? I don't interact with him in that way. So it was like, well, whatever, maybe. But I was like, that's fascinating. And that's the thing that, is attractive. Like, oh, that's what you need. You need somebody around you who's joyful all the time. Yeah, that's fair. That's, we all probably need more of that if we're not the person providing it. And so externally, that looks like emptiness, because what are you attached to when you're joyful? Everything. Well, when you're attached to everything, or maybe not everything, but nearly everything, other people can't see that, but you experience it. And so your experience is fullness, and their sight it's too blinding in a sense. There's no contrast, so they can't see. So it looks like emptiness. I think lots of things look like emptiness that aren't emptiness. Right? And I think it's impossible to experience emptiness. And the reason why I think that is because all of the indications from independent sources, from all cultures, from all walks of life, is that when you look into the abyss, it stares back. That's the Western conception. There are other conceptions. And to me, what that means is that when you try to remove everything, when you try to go to emptiness, the state of emptiness or nothingness, which would be back before creation, technically, if you think about it, you see a pair of eyes staring back at you. Of course you do. Duh. Right? Yeah, you see God. Because at the beginning of the conception of thingness, or the conception of existence, is still that which came first, which is the creator. By definition, because that is how we define it. right? That's the starting axiom, the starting presupposition, the primordial presupposition. If you want to go there, I think I'm going to throw up. So that's kind of good to know, right? Because that to me is another way to say what Jonathan just said that maybe makes a little bit more sense, or maybe I've just confused my entire audience. I have no idea. Let's continue.
Okay, so you're saying something really good, and I want to push on it because I believe you're not making a performative contradiction. A performative contradiction is when you're making a claim that undermines your ability to make the claim, right?
Whoa, that's not true at all, by the way. A performative contradiction is when you act out something different from the propositional claims that you make, right? That's why it's called performative contradiction. If you're making a claim that undermines your claim, that's a contradiction, not a performative contradiction. It's just a regular contradiction. That's all it is.
If I was to say, right now I am completely unconscious.
Yeah.
No, I have to be, right, a performative. And I agree with Whitehead that performative contradictions are much more important than, right, propositional contradictions.
Yeah.
Okay, so good. So one way it sounds like you're doing is you sound like saying, well, I'm pursuing this because, right, I think dissolving or disappearing is really good. And then what I'm trying to do as I follow this is to try to dissolve and disappear. And that sounds like, well, no, like, who are you to make that, like, do you see why there's a bind there, right?
Yeah.
And you were pushing up against that. I want to give you space because I agree with what you just said. I think we're really, again, good dialogos. We're really moving into the heart of this. This really hangs on kenosis, and obviously agape, but right, it hangs on it in a really, really crucial manner. Okay, so I'm presenting this as a bit of a paper tiger, I hope, for you. It's like, oh, you're not saying that, but say why you're not saying that more. Okay.
Well, so St. Paul, St. Paul has this image where he says it's not I that live, but Christ that lives in me. And
yeah,
it's a beautiful sentence because it captures the paradox, which he's not actually saying I don't exist anymore.
no,
He's saying it's Christ that lives in me, and so he's affirming himself to the extent that he is a manifestation of the Logos, and that is what is left. Now the way to go to get there is to shed, right? To shed a lot of the things that my passions, the things that I care about, but that ultimately, once you do that, and you can experience it fractally. It's not like I'm going to get to the end of it and all of a sudden I'm going to realize, oh, yes, I've been self-sacrificing this whole time, and so now finally it's like you see it happening nonstop, which is that when you enter into a loving relationship with someone and you let go of your just proper desires and all the things that you want, and you kind of cede way to that, then you realize that it brings the person, you and them together, and what comes out of it is more than what was there before. And so you're like, oh, wait a minute, it's not like this one thing that I'm doing, like, I'm stacking all my good work so that when I die, then you know what I mean? It's like, no, I'm noticing it happen every day, every time that I enter into that mode of being where I'm not holding on and I'm not grasping. Then what happens is I see more come out of it, and I see more of myself. Like I see more of who I truly am, right? To say,
yeah. So you're saying,
okay, I just want to just upfront tell you, yes, there was an opportunity for me to pause there, and I didn't take it, and I'll tell you why. So this is part 3. I hope you noticed what John did there. And if you didn't, fair enough. Like, I mean, look, this stuff is hard. These guys are going to cognitively overload almost everybody for sure, possibly including themselves occasionally. But I did leave that out, what he was doing, because he's been doing it all along. And I figured you could figure it out. But I wanted to give you an opportunity without me interrupting to notice something about what John said before Jonathan started talking again. And here, Jonathan again, and again, this is where I would frame it slightly differently. The external manifestation, he hinted at this, looks different from the internal experience. And this is true of many things in life, by the way. And it's funny, right? Because people notice this. The non-religious people, or we'll say the less believing people, tend to notice this in the negative. So they'll say stuff like, well, that person did a horrible thing, but to them, they were doing the good, right? So that's an implication that the experience of the person is different from the experience of everybody outside of them, right? And that their internal experience is good and the external experience is bad. And that's, a form of justification. And I think that's backwards and wrong, by the way. I think that if your internal experience is bad, but everybody's external experience is good, then that would be your personal struggle or perhaps your personal suffering, by the way. And that's why martyrdom, or the feeling of martyrdom, is dangerous, because people can fall into that very, very easily. And you don't want to fall into that, because that isn't how that works. Martyrdom is extraordinarily rare, and it ain't going to happen to you. So don't go down that road. But also, just because you're suffering, it doesn't mean you're not bringing the experience of the good to others around you. That's really important to know. So one way to think of this is not screaming at at your, obnoxious uncle at Thanksgiving. Is you ingesting or holding back your anger for the good of Thanksgiving. And everybody benefits from that. Now, that's not to say that's the only thing you should ever do. This is where discernment and judgment matter. But also, most of the time when most people do that, they are hurting themselves in some sense, or struggling more than they need to, because they're not able to blow off the steam. Or maybe they're even staying, right, instead of just leaving, so that everybody else can have a good time, right, by not creating more friction in Thanksgiving. There are lots of incidents of this. That's just the most obvious one. For me, it's one that's fairly well used. So I figured I'd use that. That, to me, is more what Jonathan's getting at.
First of all, I hear a couple things here. There's the realization that the self is inherently dialogical, not a monad, a self-isolated thing, but it exists dialogically, because that your argument, I think, depends on that. Secondly, you're invoking reciprocal opening again, and you're saying if you put those two together, the self is dialogical and reciprocal opening, you can move from being egocentric to reality-centric, but that doesn't feel like a loss, that feels like a gain. Is that okay so far?
Okay. Here's a trick, and this is a new one. John just framed everything in terms of a single thing. He's calling it the self. And that isn't what these two have been saying. They've been talking about a participation, and a participation always causes a relationship, right? With something outside of yourself. And that's what makes yourself bigger. And of course, it would have to. Like, you can't make yourself bigger. That doesn't make any sense. You're in the box that you're in. And therefore, for the box to get bigger, there has to be some external interaction, right, with a space, if you want to put it so banally. And I guess I have to, just to try to be more clear. That space was already bigger than you. So that's outside of you as well. And that's what you're expanding into. If you're expanding yourself, but you're not expanding yourself, because again, there's an outside factor doing that. John has just framed everything in terms of self and in terms of self-interaction and self-expansion, like you are inherently dialogical. No, I would say, no, that's not what I said at all. What I said is there is a dialogue, right, between myself and the logos, right, which makes me more than I am by myself. That's how I would say it. Just to stop this foolish nonsense by people like John. John's not the only person guilty of this ridiculous speaking. But yeah, it's very self-referential, and I can break out of the box. You'll notice that part of John's work is this 9-dot problem, the idea of breaking out of the box. Well, are you sure you broke out of the box, or did something break you out of the box? Because you can't, by definition, break yourself out of the box. That makes no sense.
Yeah, I'd say that. Like that.
Okay, really good. This is very good. So,
all right, they agreed. Again, I'm vehemently disagreeing. I think they fell into the trap of wanting to agree without really understanding, I'm going to posit that what's up, and I haven't watched this, guys. I'm watching it with you guys right now still. I'm not jumping ahead. It's important you see how the sausage is made in some sense, how I can do this, or rather, how me doing this, I can't tell you how I do it. I don't actually know. I suspect that he's going to drag this back into what I call Western Buddhism, right? This Western idea of Buddhism, and drag what they're calling Christianity, I would call Anglo-Cathodoxy, down into the depths of his non-duality that is oneness. He talks a lot about the one and the many, right? And never about the many, always about the one, and how the many is actually the one, or can become the one, or unifies with the one, right? The target's always the one, which is the same as escaping the many, by the way. Suspicious. And I suspect that's what he's doing here. But let's find out.
Is it fair to say, and I'm not trying to be deductive, I'm trying to be dialogical, so I'm not trying to be reductive, but is this the grounding of your faith? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Again, I'm not talking about propositions being derived from more deeper propositions. We've gone through this thing about how do you get the particularity of your Christian faith. Is this, in that sense, please be fair to me, is this the grounding of your Christian faith, the way I just described it?
Okay, so here's the problem. He just described in propositions a very small part of a very long conversation. I would say the crux of the conversation was around this theosis. Now, he hasn't mentioned theosis since then, and the thesis he just gave did not involve theosis, because again, he reframed everything in terms of self, and nothing outside of self at all. It's a very sort of clever move in some ways. I don't like that move. I don't think it's a valid move to be made in good faith, and I dislike having to accuse John of not being in good faith, but here I think it's evident, and I'm sorry, but that's what I'm seeing. Theosis doesn't involve self. It involves selflessness, less self. It's that simple in some sense. You can't reduce it to that either, by the way. So you'll notice John's like, well, I don't want to be reductive, and then he reduces it. I don't like that particular move. I understand that sometimes such a move, or a move that looks a lot like that, may be necessary. So I'm not going to say no never, but also I'm going to say no in this case for sure.
Okay, so I'm going to say it back to you with a slightly different way, but I think I heard you. So all three of us happen to be fathers.
Yes.
Of children. And we have the first person experience, therefore, of the kenosis that is intrinsic in parenting, all the way down to the color of the hair in your beard. And
yeah, and the loss of your life, you lose years for every child.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. And to the unique qualities of possibility, of joy, that are exclusively possible in this creative act.
Okay, I want to pause it right there. You have a duality of framing going on here. You'll notice, hopefully, that John said the loss of years. And then Jordan is saying things like, well, no, it's expansive, right? Having children is expansive. Okay. Having children is in exactly negative ways a loss of years, because your children outlive you on average. It is a gaining of years. It's a gaining of years of your experience passed down to your children. So there's no loss there whatsoever. Why would you frame it that way? The only way you can see children as a loss of years in particular, or really a loss of anything in my mind, but whatever. The only way you can see children as a loss is if you posit that you are a self, and that your self has, we'll say, the highest value or something, and that value is somehow compromised by the parasitic nature of children, or just the fact that when you have children, it's not all about you anymore. But that's the only framing where that makes sense. So you can see a little statement. It seems like a little statement, the loss of years to children. And you can see, like, you can go into somebody's perspective, right? A personal, private perspective of self and say, oh, of course, there's a valid perspective where that makes sense. But then what you don't see, because it's very hard to do, right? And also you've just spent a bunch of cognition, a bunch of mental energy, time, energy, and attention on adopting a different perspective, right? To try to redeem the statement. I don't try to redeem statements, by the way, because I find it a waste of energy and I don't want to. I'd rather have the person change their perspective so that they can communicate with me. Unless they don't want to, in which case go away. Seriously, I tell people to go away all the time. It never works, but eventually it can work if they get silly. You're trying to redeem that statement. You're adopting their perspective of personal self or whatever. And you're saying, well, from that perspective, it makes sense, but you're not accounting for all the implications of that. Okay, I'm stuck in a personal implication of self. I see children as parasites who are stealing years from me. And therefore, right? And that has all kinds of other knock-on implications. It's also a tell for individualism. The only way you think an interaction with children that are yours is a loss for you is if you're an individualist, a hardcore, solid individualist. That's the only way it's a loss for you, right? Once you recognize that children are the extension of you, it's not a loss for you at all. So because of our need and want to cooperate, we adopt a bogus, invalid perspective of selfness and redeem the statement that children are a loss of years. Foolishness. Jordan is reframing this, and now they're stuck in an opposition, actually, right? Where John's framing everything around self, Jordan's framing everything around so much bigger, so much more, right? And then John's already linked this selfness with moreness somehow, which I just talked about. Like, that's invalid. No. And so he's probably going to expand from there. This is just my guess. I know John pretty well, though, so let's see how it goes.
Gated or mediated simultaneously by both the kenosis and the communion, and the unparalleled degree of new qualities of grief that are available also in this experience. And in the recognition in yourself that both in spite of and because of the aforementioned, it is incomprehensible that you could be even vaguely who you are absent that.
Right.
That's probably the closest to the grounding of my faith that I can get to. And I have a process where I go, oh, right. If my grief at the suffering of my children is X, how much greater is God's grief at the suffering of all of creation?
Oh, I like that. Okay. So again, Jordan's trying to expand out the picture of this self, right? And then this is a great move. This is a truly great move, Jordan. Thank you. It's a fantastic move. He shows you the fractal nature one layer up, right? If a father's grief is X, a little weird way to talk about it, but whatever, I'll allow it. I love it. Father's grief is X at the suffering of their children. Imagine how great God's grief is at the suffering of the world. Yes, that's the fractality, the self-similar fractality of the universe right there. The universe is self-similar fractal. Yes, it is. Jonathan Pageau says fractal, but it's self-similar is the technical name. I know I'm being a little nitpicky, but also I've read too much of that and I love that math. So yeah, super important. And there's a demonstration of it. That is the self-similar fractal nature of reality right there in a nutshell. It's a great example. I have never thought of that example. So great gift from this conversation right there.
And I can notice that there's something about these connections where I can have a sense of real empathy down and suddenly have a really weird sense of empathy up. Huh. I get it now. I get you, God, in a weird way, because I get my dad. Oh, my actual dad, which I didn't get before. When my kids do something like, oh, I get it. I get what was going on in the experience of a being who loves me from the outside, like from before I existed, and understands me in a certain context. And that through that line, there's a way of having a quality of relationship with the Abba. And so that, like the rightness of that, the way that actually develops, the way that grounds everything else. And by the way, in this also philosophically and metaphysically, I would say that's probably the ground of my faith.
Wow. I'm going to push back on the word empathy. I dislike that word. I think probably the conclusion we've come to is that empathy is a word appropriate only in application to mothers towards children under the age of 5. After that, you cannot empathize with them, because what you're basically saying is that you encompass their feelings such that you feel their feelings and your feelings too. And that's ridiculous. That makes you 2 people, and you're not 2 people. You're only 1 people. Or some of us are less than 1 people, maybe. I would prefer sympathy, but I like what he did there. I would also say that the aspect of self-similar practicality of the universe or the world, or however you want existence, however you want to frame it, means that reciprocal means both up and down in scale. That's what reciprocal means. As opposed to oppositional, which is only makes things lesser. Reciprocal makes things greater by linking them up and down the self-similar fractal chain of reality. I think that's the better way to think of things like reciprocal. It also, then you require, like, your vocabulary shrinks, right? Which is a good thing. Then you'll get less cognitively overloaded once you understand, we'll say, simple models for the world instead of these complicated models with big long words and compound words and bad translations of Greek words that are impossible because you can't translate Greek in that way, word for word. So yeah, this reciprocal idea, I think linking it to what Jordan just said, where there's this up and down the scale way of thinking about things from your experience, and linking them to the experience of something, we'll say, same pattern beneath you and the same pattern above you. That's actually really important. I think one of the things that's that I would say might be missing from this is that's the smallest possible configuration of 3. I would say there's a way in which adding in a little more nuance, a few more layers between, say, you and God might be helpful, and adding in a few more layers because, you see a friend suffer, it's similar, but of course it's not your child. So, also not the same. And by doing that, you get a better sense of the quality, because he does invoke quality here at the end, which of course I love. This is great. Quality of your relationship is intimacy, by the way. That's how I define it. That's why it's an intimacy crisis that leads to the meaning crisis. See previous videos on intimacy crisis. And I'll probably talk more about that at some point. I always hesitate to talk about intimacy crisis on my own because gotta have a female there. I gotta. Otherwise, it's just not. It's not right. It's too easy to get lost. So that's how I would frame it. But I love what Jordan did there. It was great. Let's continue.
So I heard you saying, I want to put 2 grounds together, if you'll prevent me from, I hope I'm not grinding things. So there was this one, which is the ontonormativity, the goodness of being, and therefore any attempt, and I'm picking up on Jonathan here, any attempt to escape is ultimately misguided. And then I'm fulfilling that commitment to ontonormativity, entering into reciprocal opening, deeper relationship with the goodness of being. And the best way I experience that is in the kenosis, understood as agape, because of course parental love is the metaphor, the paradigmatic example of agapic love. And Christianity captures that. Sorry, I don't have the right verb here, but just let me use that word. Captures that very well for you. Is that? Did I say it back to you in a way that lands?
Well,
Okay, so notice once again the reframing, and I would call it misframing. You call it misframing. Sorry, John, misframing. Me. This in relation to me, right? The ontonormativity. So I own it because I use big fancy scientific words that absolutely don't mean what he's conceptualizing there. By the way, just flat out do not. And this idea that you can reciprocally open into being is good. This is that. So I have a video on middle out thinking. I will, of course, try to link it here. I have a video on middle out thinking. This is middle out thinking. Anything that's, say, narcissistic or individualistic is middle out thinking. It starts from the individual, from the narcissist, from the person, right? And then it's outwards framing from there. It's them in relation to the other things, right? And occasionally they'll drag in something like ontonormativity, which is supposed to give you this sense of what I call objective material reality. I have a good video on objectivism, individualism, and I forget the third one, right? Where that builds closed worlds. And it always ends up with this objective material reality idea of this neutral space from which you can stand to judge things. So sometimes it drags that in, but generally the individualistic perspective is this whole idea that everything relates to me, and actually the starting point, the starting axiom, the primordial presumption, if you will, is that being is good. The reciprocal opening is in your participation with other beings. You notice he never mentions other beings. What it's like to be a father. Okay. Well, God's the father though, dude. I'm just saying, at least from the Anglo-Cathodoxy point of view. So what are you saying? Why are you framing it that way? How about and you'll notice in Jordan's example, it was my relationship with my son shines light on my relationship with my father in the past, like my actual father that bore me, right? Which then shines light on my relationship with God the Father. Whereas John relates everything back to himself. Everything. I was the father, not his relationship with his father, which, come to think of it, I don't think I've ever heard him mention. Not once. Interesting. I haven't heard every talk John's given, so whatever. I haven't heard him mention it. That might be important, by the way. So notice that difference. And there's a clear gap here now. And I think it's super clear. I think maybe Jordan's at least getting an inkling of it. I think this is where I want to tell you, dear viewer, if you were overwhelmed in this conversation, I think Jonathan and Jordan were too. And part of their being overwhelmed is in their trying to cooperate with John by lowering themselves into his frame. And to some extent, you have to do that. You have to condescend. Condescension is what good teachers do, by the way. Arrogance is what most people use, or what most people refer to when they use condescension. Those are different things. You should take note of that. So they're condescending, but they're not able to drag John out of it because they're not able to point out to John what he's doing, the error that he's actually making. And if if he doesn't think he's making an error, or somebody else doesn't think he's making an error, come fight me, bro. I'll die on that hill. That's an error in thought. You cannot think that way. And it is a reformulation. And he is taking two things and reducing them to one thing again. And no, if there's two things, there's two things. Why can't there be two things? Or why can't there be three things? Because if you only have two things, it's dualism. And he's trying to reduce it down to a non-dualism that is less than two. I don't know why. This is ridiculous. Well, I do know why. Science wants things reduced to one free variable. That's the goal of science. That's how science, quote, knows things. That's how science makes proclamations. It reduces things to a single variable, and then it controls for that one variable. And that tells it a bunch of stuff. Like, fair enough. Like, yes. Also, that's what John's doing.
Captures part is not quite right. So yeah, it's right with that.
Yeah. I don't like it, but something like that. Yeah.
It's more like strengthened, clarified.
Yeah. Okay. Affords, makes possible.
And so
Okay. So you notice the argument here, capture. That is what John would previously has referred to as having mode, right? And then Jordan comes back with strengthen. That's reciprocally opening. Capture is reciprocally narrowing. Right? So that's interesting. And then John sort of, like, this is this weird propositional negotiation, which is unnecessary. They said what they meant, and they meant what they said, and it wasn't that hard. And why can't you just say yes? That would be my question. Like, why can't you just agree to that and say yes? And sure, it's complicated and messy maybe in your mind, but also too bad. Like, the world is complicated and messy. I don't know how you get around that. Look around. So all kinds of wacky stuff going on. All the theology talk in the world isn't going to fix that. But it may help you navigate it, right? Which is what it's designed to do, or maybe not the theology talk, but the actual practice of Anglo-Cathodoxy is designed specifically through distributed cognition, through time, to allow you to participate in the best way possible with a messy world. That's what we're talking about. It's what everybody's talking about, whether they realize it or not. And so, why the negotiation over the wording? And notice reciprocally narrowing wording from John Vervaeke, reciprocally opening wording from Jordan Hall. I love where I pause this. Notice Jonathan's sort of alarmed, like, what's going on here? Yeah, good question.
supports. So affords is pretty good, right? Because it both pattern matches, but more than pattern matching provides a model, and more than modeling provides the embodied body of the church, right? An actual living incarnation of the thing that the model is conveying that is real, in the sense that all the things that I know in my deepest wisdom are the right ways to be in relationship with other people are lived in the community of my church.
Okay, I like what Jordan did here, although I disagree with settling on affordance. Affordance is a very neutral, reciprocal sort of term, right? Where reciprocal means the scientific version of reciprocal, which is roughly autopoetic. Like, oh, well, you do this and that affects me, and I do this and that affects you. And so we both affect each other in the affecting. You didn't say anything, though. So who cares? Like, all you said is you can't do a thing without affecting another thing. Thanks. I couldn't figure that out by mere observation. I breathe, I move the air. That moves the air everywhere. Yes, it does. True? Who cares? Obvious? And then Jordan kind of expands it out, right? And I'm not sure I love his progression, but it's sufficient. I would have added that the knowing that affords the wisdom comes through the participation. So I would have gone up the ladder to experience or participation and then gone back down to knowing and said that's how the knowing happens. That's what affords the wisdom. That's what I would have done, but yeah, maybe Jordan's doing it better. I don't know, whichever one you understood better.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for this. You're both being very charitable to me, and I appreciate that. I do think there are...
Okay. Thank you for this. You're both being very charitable. So John's, taking control of and asserting a position of authority over the conversation that, quite honestly, is inappropriate.
Versions of Buddhism that are committed deeply to non-escape. Zen is a clear example of that. The idea of nirvana as escape is explicitly, completely, repeatedly rejected, and there is the self-emptying aspect in relationship to that, and then there is the it's not I who live but the Buddha nature that lives in me. All of these if you'll allow me, and I'm searching for words. All of these functions, I'm trying to use a neutral term, are found there equally well. Now, I'm not saying they're found equally well in all religions. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. Okay. You're doing what I'm asking you to do. You're showing me why this doesn't degenerate into, a liberal toleration kind of thing, right? So, what would you? I mean,
Well, does
All right, let me just interject here. So let me clear a few things up. This Western Buddhist nonsense is nonsense. I forget where the commentary was. It might have been in one of the translations of the Tao Te Ching. But one of the observations that was made when we were reading the Tao Te Ching, and that, yeah, I get it, it's not Buddhist per se. It doesn't matter, guys. We're talking about Eastern spirituality versus Western spirituality. That's what we're talking about. You can invoke Buddhism or specific sects of Buddhism like Zen all day long. It doesn't change, like, because you're equivocating between the specific and the general again anyway. So I'm going to go back to the general and say, generally speaking, the Eastern thought is all about conforming to the political order. The Tao Te Ching is specifically about giving people a license and a reason to conform to the political order, or the hierarchical order of birth or something, which is maybe political order is a little too unfair. That's one of the things it does. Also, the order that you're in relation to the things below you, not just the order you're in relation to things above you. It's very much, we'll say, I hate this word, propagandistic in that way. It's very much designed to make you think in that frame. I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se, but the difference, and I hope one of them is going to point this out, is that with the Anglo-Cathodox tradition, you have a divine feminine archetype, you have a divine masculine, you have a masculine pattern. There's nothing divine about the masculine. Sorry, guys. This is why we die in war. You have a masculine pattern, and you have an exemplification, and you have a story. And you know which of those you have in Zen Buddhism? None of them. 0 of them. Sorry, you don't. You actually don't. It's kind of explicit, right? There's little hints of this. Like, if you see Buddha on the road, run him over. What? Right? So you're not supposed to exemplify him. You're supposed to cause him suffering, I guess. There's no taking on of anything by Buddha. He doesn't take anything on. He's kind of a jerk, actually. Leaves his family. Not a great story. Just not a great story. Sorry. I don't know what story you read if you thought it was a great story. Not a great story. Very selfish story. Very selfish story. That might explain a lot, by the way. That might explain why narcissists seem drawn to Eastern or Western Buddhism or Eastern sorts of traditions, because it's very easy, because of their misunderstanding of those traditions, to cast themselves as a selfless, selfish person or something, which is very much what people do if you pay attention. They do it all the time. So I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's a hint. That's just me. Let's see where we go from here.
Does Zen, let's say, formulate the infinite as relational to the finite?
Yes.
And so we can enter into...
Emptiness is form, form is emptiness. Exactly, explicitly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's not a relationship. That's a statement that A is B and B is A. That's not a relationship. Okay, you can say explicitly all day long. That's not explicit. And what I would say is this is the irony, non-participatory. So in other words, if A is B and B is A, there's nothing I can do about it, and I'm not involved in that. If, on the other hand, I have free will to create more suffering in this world or more joy in this world, I can participate in that. That's a big difference. That's not a little difference. That's a big difference. And so I think the error, if it's possible for a fine French Canadian like Jonathan Pageau to make such a thing, here is that he has lowered into the propositions without realizing the power of the story, which is really where we should be talking. Like, we should be talking about the power of the story, because that affords you ways to participate. And those affordances are the ability to manifest free will. And the result of that is either more suffering, right? Or joy. That's how I would parse this. That would be my pushback to John. Zen doesn't have that. Sorry. It does not.
So I mean, I know this is going to sound weird, but then why don't people pray in Zen?
They do. So I happen to know a Zen Roshi, and he prays and he chants, and so forth.
What's the infinite like? Does it have a sense of humor?
I'm sorry, Jordan. You're going to have to be more precise in what you mean by that question.
Well, one of the things of something that has a character relationship is that it has a character relationship, and so the question is something like,
okay, I don't like this move, saying one of the things about the thing is the thing about the thing. Yeah, that's self-referential, Jordan. I'm sorry, man, but I gotta ring the bell on that one. Nah, bro. Nah. I think it's sufficient, though, to say if there's no relation, in other words, if A is B and B is A, there can't be a relation. Right? There's no relation with you. You're not involved in that equation, right? Now, and let me go back just a little. When I make a statement, A is B and B is A, I'm putting myself in objective material reality in this sort of neutral space higher up of judgment, where I have a perfect perspective, or all perspectives at once, or something silly that doesn't exist. OMR doesn't exist. There's no such thing. Then there is no possible relationship for me or for you. And there's no possible relationship for you to me. So the statement stands on its own. I stand on my own in our OMR, and you stand on your own apart from both of those things, A, the statement, and me. The purpose of having a story of a creator that manifested an aspect of himself in the form that is our form is a direct statement of a participation. And if you exemplify that participation that he had in our corporeal material reality, then you will have a better non-material or ethereal or spiritual relationship with him. That is afforded through the story. That story, the affordance, is the statement of free will, by the way. I think actually those are the same thing now that I'm thinking about that a little bit. Those are the same thing. And therefore, you can turn that affordance into good, right, or joy, or bad, suffering. I think that's a better way to think about these things. I like my language better because we came up with it. So, of course I do.
Well, okay, let me answer that. Let me answer that first. Okay, so, this is Schellenberg, who's an atheist, but he says what we're talking about sacred is, it's ultimately real. And again, not in the neutral sense, in the ontonormative. I want to participate in it. So that's a relationship term. I want to participate in it. I want to conform to it. I want to reciprocally open. I want to be realized by it as I realize it. All of that.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right here. You can't make a statement that a relationship exists when there is no participation. Oh, that's ridiculous. And I think that's an error that a lot of people make. And if you made it fair enough, like, I'm not saying, you're a dummy or anything like that. I'm saying that we get trapped in this a lot, where we're observing something after the fact. That's hindsight bias. And then casting it as though it hasn't happened, right? Or it's about to happen. That's a hindsight bias problem. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's roughly hindsight bias. Like, oh, we see the plane flew and therefore we know we can make planes. That's not how planes were made, though, right? Go to Kitty Hawk. I've been. Wonderful museum. We cannot talk about a relationship that pre-exists our participation in it. We may posit that it is possible to have a relationship with something, and we may posit what type of relationship that could be. But relationships don't pre-exist participation ever by definition. That is actually a really important way to think about it, because it prevents, to some extent, a great deal of hubris. And that's super important. And that is what's missing here, is that humility, which we have on one side, but not with John, because he's constantly casting things into this weird self-referential frame or middle-out thinking frame where the center is always the self, right? And everything is related from that position.
Secondly, it's ultimately orienting, like people reorient towards it, right? And it's ultimately transformative. It causes, this the deepest possible transformation from being egocentric to being profoundly reality-centric.
But does it care about you? That's the question.
Okay, so I want to point out something. It. If you replace it with God, a lot of these problems go away. John's not doing that, by the way. That didn't happen. Maybe you did that in your head because you didn't like the word it, and the word it is ambiguous, and it's not defined in this context at all, as near as I can tell. I could be wrong about that. This is pretty cognitively overwhelming for me. But what is the it that he's referring to? Because I honestly don't know. I don't think he knows. But if you replace it with God, then yes. And then listen to what Jordan's saying now.
Does it care about you?
Why does that matter to you?
Bingo. Does it care about you? Does it care about you? Does it care about you? It, God, relating downward, emanation. Is there an emanation at you? Why does that matter to you? Because that's the only thing that matters. Make final cause great again. Final cause and telos are roughly the same thing in my estimation. I could be wrong about that, but I'll fight on that hill for that, I think. We'll see who dies. Maybe me. Don't know. I'm fairly sure the same thing. Or ultimate final cause is telos, something like that. This is the misunderstanding of emanation, and this is a sign of denial of creation. Right? In order to have all things created, I hate the word thing, but it's the best I can do. I apologize. It might be the best anybody can do, so I'm not going to apologize too hard. Caring has to have existed in order for creation to come into existence. Best I can do. I know I'm double using existence. I overloaded the operator. I get it. Also, we're past the limits of language. Right. This is the Heideggerian critique. God cannot be a being because a being couldn't create other beings. Yes. And go back to your 4th grade class now, please. This is a stupid thing to say. Yeah. At some point you run out of words, or the ability of words to encompass the concepts and meanings that are in your thoughts fails. That happens all the time. It's a propositional tyranny that John ironically talks about and doesn't recognize for some odd reason.
That's a question. It might matter a lot, but it's definitely a question.
Notice Jordan calls John out. John's like, is that a question? Yeah, it's a question. I asked it as a question. It's a valid question, right? He says, hey, it might not matter a lot, but it is a question, right? And so John's critique, is that a question, which is a critique, by the way, it's skeptical, cynical critique, is invalid. Yes, it's a question. Of course, it's a question. It was asked as a question. Everybody recognizes it as a question. You'll notice Jonathan laughs hysterically because that is kind of hysterical. But Jordan's able to call John out. And that's important because that's a ridiculous move on John's part. He should not have done that. Is that a question? Yeah, it's a question. Duh.
Well, so here's okay. Let's do that. I mean,
I'm basically trying to do like what are the dots and see where the patterns match, and if they're isomorphic, they're isomorphic, and this ends up being something that may not be isomorphic, and then we can talk about it.
Okay. Then John's like, oh, okay, we can do that. Thought we were already doing that, whatever that is. Honestly, I don't know what he thinks changed or why he thinks it's like this imposition on him to address that as a question. It was a question. And then Jordan very cleverly, brings it into the math. I don't necessarily agree with this. Jordan's getting a little too high for me, even. I think I'm still following him. I get the isomorphic. Like I think I see what he's pointing at there. And if you don't fair, don't worry about it. Like this is heavy stuff, right? At some point, and we've passed that point actually. So if you've gone with me this far, congratulations. So yeah, this isomorphic nature, whatever, absolutely. Like I see what he's seeing in terms of where John's going. Or where John could go, in fact. But you notice he doesn't use that language. Unlike John, he doesn't use that language. And he just says, let's just see if it goes there, sort of a thing. Yeah, fine, fair. That's much better than saying, well, your possible answers are number one. No.
Right. Okay. So the concern there is, I guess I'm going to try and speak on behalf of a Zen person. That's a little bit tricky, but
speak on behalf of the Buddha specifically.
Oh yeah.
What a genius move, Jordan. What a genius move, right? He's basically made a ridiculous request, right? So John made a ridiculous proposition. I'm going to speak on behalf of, no, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not. Right. I mean, unless you're the president of some organization, you're not speaking on behalf of anything. Sorry. And then Jordan's like, nah, bro, go all in. Just speak on behalf of Buddha. And you'll notice Jonathan finds this hysterically funny. Do you know why? Because it's hysterically funny. Right. And John basically, honestly, doesn't get the joke.
Yeah. John will now be the Buddha, the Tathagata, right? My concern, and I mean, this is not a concern that's like weird. A lot of Christian theology has been responding to this concern, which is the ontotheological critique. The problem when you start saying it cares for me, or he cares for me, is it sounds like you're turning God into a person, and persons are prototypical Aristotelian substances. In fact, that's Aristotle's primary example of what a substance is, a person, which I don't think is a good translation of hypostasis, by the way. And
okay, hold on, just hold on, right? So John makes a claim that Aristotle says a person is substance. I'm going to guess, not having really read any Aristotle, that there's no way in hell that Aristotle said anything remotely like that. Now, I have grounds for this. I've said this before. John completely misquotes and misunderstands Socrates. I know nothing. Socrates never said anything even remotely like that. That is a ridiculous statement. I'm going to say this is a ridiculous statement. He, in fact, contradicts that very notion by saying, I think it's a bad translation. Well, dude, if you think it's a bad translation, then why did you go there? I'm sure it's a bad translation. I'm sure it's not a substance. I'm sure Aristotle's not an idiot. And I'm sure Aristotle doesn't think anything like that and never wrote anything like that. I'm quite certain of it. If somebody wants to bring me Greek translation texts, you'll have to bring me like 5 though, because I ain't gonna settle for 1. And prove to me that Aristotle very consistently said and meant that persons were substance. And there's another trick in here, which is to say are substance or have substance. Are substance implies in English that that's all encompassing. Okay, I'm a billion% positive Aristotle doesn't believe that, irrespective of how you interpreted or anybody interpreted his works. Aristotle was a believer in forms. He did not disagree with Plato about forms. He disagreed with Plato, if anything, or maybe a couple of other things, about what to emphasize, the forms or the substance, or the forms of the material. That's the way I would put it. That was a disagreement. He disagreed with Plato about how much should be taught, how much should be written down in books, and how much should be participated in or acted out or experienced. Those are disagreements they had. Did they have other disagreements? I'm not so sure. I know that other people have said this before, like not sure how much they disagreed on any other things. Those two things they definitely had some disagreements about. And I'm not sure they were settled one way or the other. They might have been, not my scholarship region, don't care, not going to do it. Also notice that John keeps using it and then reluctantly going to God. This is a subtle, hypnotic, psychological trick. Don't fall for it. I don't think John's doing it maliciously or even knowingly. Subconscious is real. Possession by your own subconscious, we can go there to be as secular as possible. You could put in other more religious frames if you want. Go right ahead. I don't care. Probably more correct than what I said. Just saying. It's important to realize that throughout this, what we've done is we've done a lot of confusing of the specific for the general and the general for the specific. Does the same thing, obviously, right? Doesn't matter which direction they're going in, you're still switching frames and not revealing it. And we've also done something else. We haven't refuted the utility of Anglo-Cathodoxy, which they're calling Christianity, which again, I have my objections to. What we've done is we've said, oh, no, we've got the same thing in the East. And we clearly don't. Like that, no, that just didn't happen. Right? It's had thousands of years to unfold in the East, and it hasn't unfolded that way. It's that simple. Like the experiment has been done, the experiment has failed in the East in an important way, and you just have to live with that because that happened. And at some point, you just need to throw in the towel and give up and say, yeah, this isn't the same thing, and it doesn't work as well, and that's too bad, right? And so now what we have is an oppositional frame, right? East versus West, and we're saying, well, West isn't any better than East. Does that invalidate West somehow? Because I don't think it does. I don't know how it would. Only if you're stuck on a binary frame or an oppositional frame. But that's an invalidation by implication, not by reality, right? It's just sort of a, haha, this invalidates that. So look, I'm tired. We're going to do 4 parts. I hope that's okay. If not, don't watch the 4th part. I think there's enough here, actually. Although, man, am I looking forward to the last part. And I won't watch it without you guys. Because I'm really enjoying this, actually. Far more than I should be. I feel bad. I really like John. John's really done a lot for me personally and for a bunch of people that I really care about and came to care about because of John, right? So this is tough for me in some sense, in that sense. But also, like, enough is enough, right? We're well past the ability to pretend like there's something other than I don't like Christianity or something going on here. That's clearly the only thing that's going on. And we kind of need to stop the madness because we're at that point, or we're past that point, really. So this is my little part to do my little dog-headed secular thing on that. Look, if you like the work, visit the Mark of Wisdom website. We got the storefront, the markofwisdom.org/shop. Those links should be in the description. Get me a buy me a coffee, whatever, because I could use a coffee. Well, tea. I don't drink coffee. After this nonsense, and man, part 4 coming soon. But look, thank you guys. I hope you found this helpful. I hope this does inspire more people. I'm just overwhelmed by people saying like, wow, I never realized I could get cognitively overloaded like this, and that's been happening to me, and who knows how many times. That was the goal. Just to show you guys that you can get cognitively overloaded by these people and think they're saying something good when they're not, or think they're saying things that they're definitely not saying, or think they're saying things that are the opposite of what's being said. And that happens to me too, man. Like, but I wanna help combat that and at least give you a sense for maybe there's conversations you should listen to. Maybe there's people that are just too enchanting to you personally. Whether they're enchanting to others or not is really not relevant, by the way. Or how many of those people there are. Who cares? Normativity is a garbage frame anyway. But maybe just for your own health, like, oh, stay away from these people because you're too attracted to them, right? Like, I have a friend. She knows that she was very attracted to, like, as seen on TV, the 1995 marketing campaigns. Avoid those. I'm too attracted to candy, and I shouldn't keep it at my desk. And I suck, so I did. Like we have got to curate our signal, and if this helps you to curate your signal, then man, mission accomplished. I'm so thrilled. Just even the 2 people that already commented, I'm just so happy. I could just. That's why I continued with this tonight. Actually, it's like, oh, with inspiration from the comments. So comment, inspire me more. And I'll see you next time for part 4.